Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Brought to you once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio. Today, Russia threatens a military response to NATO. Also here in the United States, the Biden campaign spins out of control. And at the southern border, is the U.S. government aiding and abetting human trafficking and the trafficking of children? And today as well on the show, our guest J. Michael Waller to discuss the elections in Europe and what does that bode for the United States. As always, here at Patriot Radio, we strive to bring you the most accurate information and way ahead of the mainstream media. And remember, we're doing this so you and your family can be prepared for the times that are ahead and, in fact, the times that are upon us. No fear. We were made for this. Now, regarding the Summer of Harvest, please subscribe on Rumble, Patriot Radio US, and follow us on Telegram for real-time intelligence updates, moment to moment. Every day you can scroll that. You don't have to do the doom scrolling because we do it for you. And also today, I want to give a little perspective on where we're at. And that is, we're going to show up, we're going to vote. We're going to do things locally. It's our responsibility for us to repent of our sins, make sure our family is repenting of their sins, and forgiving each other and those that have wronged us. And when we have the opportunity to get out there and vote and be the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But in a lot of ways, what we're talking about today is in God's hands. It doesn't mean we don't act. We move from prayer to action. But a lot of this is in God's hands. We can only do what we can do. And last night, at the last time study, I very quickly talked about that we are going to be responsible for what we're responsible for, and that if we stop the curse and the evil in our sphere of influence, that is indeed what we're responsible for. But we don't necessarily have to allow the curses to come in along with the evil. We can actually stop the evil, and God has given us the authority, Luke 10:19, over all the power of the evil one. And he has also given us the power through the Holy Spirit to stop it and to tread upon it. So let's think about what we're supposed to be doing in our sphere as we come into this most tumultuous end of 2024 and into the election and beyond, because the enemy's plans are to overthrow the constitutional order of the United States of America, and the enemy's plans are to sow chaos and violence and destruction. In short, to kill, steal, and destroy. And what is going to stop the forces of evil in the United States are patriots and Christians, you and me, doing the small things every day to push back the darkness. And when we're called upon to stand and hold the line against those who would destroy this country. And that brings us now to the Bible teaching today out of Psalm 138, verse 7 and 8. Though I walk in the midst of trouble, you will revive me. You will reach out with your hand against the wrath of my enemies, and your right hand will save me. The Lord will accomplish what concerns me. Your faithfulness, Lord, is everlasting. Do not abandon works of your hands. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. That brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing, coming to us from the globalist front.
Those naughty globalists.
The UN Cybercrime Convention is a blank check for surveillance abuses. The only way to stop the United Nations from meddling in the United States and world affairs is to throw the entire organization into the Atlantic Ocean. Figuratively, of course, according to Technocracy News. The United Nations, I keep doing that, but it's kind of becoming a problem. The United Nations Ad Hoc Committee is just weeks away from finalizing a too-broad cybercrime draft convention. This draft would normalize unchecked domestic surveillance and rampant government overreach, allowing serious human rights abuses around the world. The latest draft of the convention, originally spearheaded by Russia, how about not following that lead, still authorizes broad surveillance powers without robust safeguards and fails to spell out data protection principles essential to prevent government abuse of power. How about we just stop? It's so weird. You know the direction that they're headed. One world government, one world religion, one world economy. And on that, I'm going to digress just a little bit. I want to give a brief history lesson. I'm going to go into this next week, and I hope we have the picture ready from When the Almond Tree Blossoms. Here's the bottom line. The globalists have been afraid of this area of the country for a very long time. And I find it interesting that an Army surplus store where Cornell Razor, a very conservative, patriot Christian American, worked, was burned to the ground in the American Redoubt here just a few days ago. And that these targeted attacks appear to be beginning in the United States against elected officials, churches, etc. Now, this has already happened in Europe. It's happening now here in the United States. And the reason it is because, and the reason it's happening in the Redoubt is because they are afraid of this area. And they have been for a very long time. From the war games that Jack Decker talked about in 2014 to when Rob Reiner put out his narrative movie on white nationalism, the same day Pack up in North Idaho puts out a video regarding white nationalism. Why would it appear in the only other place in the country, place that they fear most? Well, in a book called When the Almond Tree Blossoms, written back in the early 1990s, and supposedly, this is not verified. I'm going to say it again, it's not verified. It was written based off of a Rand Corporation report about what the United States would look like in 20 years. So 2012-ish and beyond. In that book, they predicted an American Civil War. And they said that the seat of the resistance to that attempted communist takeover of America, would be in Helena, Montana, but in the American Redoubt. Also, and very interestingly, that book predicted that the unrest would begin in St. Louis, Missouri, which it did. Now, there's more to this. I've got a whole bunch of different maps you can do overlays with this to show why this is a true statement, both demographically and historically, and based on a whole other host of economic factors. But the fact is that this book, When the Almond Tree Blossoms, was endorsed. In other words, there was a written endorsement on the back cover of the hardcover of the book by Zbigniew Brzezinski. Now, you may not remember that name, but that is the same guy who helped start the Trilateral Commission, or in other words, the one globalist entity that's really in charge of a one world economy. Now, yes, I know the World Economic Forum is out there publicly, but this was the original organization trying to bring together business and these corporations that actually control most of the companies in places like the United States, BlackRock, Fidelity, and Vanguard. Okay, so we see this map. This is what they're afraid of. This is what they are afraid of. They are afraid of Americans in, quote, flyover country not going along with things. And we've seen what they tried to do in France. We're going to be talking about that with our guest today, J. Michael Waller. But they fear the place where people are most tied to the land and the cycle of life because, as Thomas Jefferson said, that is the repository of the values of a country. When people are tied to the land, They're tied to the cycle of life, and therefore the values that make a nation great are more protected in those areas and passed around and passed down to generations. So, with that said, we're going to move off the globalist front and we're going to move next to the China front. A Times map showing U.S. bases in Japan and South Korea and future bases in the Philippines. I want to bring this graphic up. This is going to show you why China is beginning to be very aggressive in the South China Sea. I want you to take a look at this group of bases and future bases. If we could pull that graphic up from Twitter. You'll see that from North Japan all the way down to almost the main part of the Philippines, all those bases form a gigantic line closing off North Korea and China. That is what the Chinese most fear. And of course, Taiwan, right in the middle of one of the biggest gaps right there. And now you can understand geographically why the Chinese are becoming more aggressive and why it very clearly looks like we're headed toward war in the Pacific. Also, a flotilla of 4 Chinese naval vessels were detected this past weekend near the Aleutian Islands. You heard that correctly, near Alaska. And the Bering Strait, roughly 100 nautical miles off the coast of Alaska. The flotilla remained in international waters and were monitored by U.S. Coast Guard ships. But this is very close to the U.S. exclusive economic zone. So, the Chinese now trying to push the boundaries. That brings us now to the Middle East front. Coming to us from Robert Spencer, Jihad Watch. If you haven't ever subscribed to Jihad Watch, I would recommend it. The Taliban praised the stance of the Biden regime toward its rule and say it's commendable. Okay, that's probably the worst endorsement you could possibly have when the Taliban say you're being commendable toward them. Also, the U.S. is to resume shipments of some bombs to Israel. The United States will resume the provision of 500-pound bombs to Israel, but will continue to hold back a 2,000-pound version, per officials speaking to the media. Shipments were paused in May due to concerns over their use in Rafah, where over 1 million civilians had fled during the IDF invasion of northern and central Gaza. Very likely those bombs have been released also in preparation for war in southern Lebanon. And lastly, on the Middle East front, Turkey's Erdogan warns against a NATO-Russia conflict. And again, this is right in the middle of the NATO summit. Erdogan is warning against a NATO-Russia conflict. A NATO ally no more. Very interesting proposition there. And that brings us now to the Russia front. Again, remember, we are right in the middle of the NATO summit. A new NATO missile defense base has started operating in Poland. Alliance Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg has said, according to Reuters, this allows for the intercepting of short and medium-range ballistic missiles at the same time and is part of NATO's larger missile defense shield. Following right on the heels of that announcement, the U.S. and Germany have, and actually more than that, and we're going to put the U.S. in there even though it's not listed in the article. France, Germany, Italy, and Poland announced they will jointly develop new ground-launched long-range cruise missiles with a range exceeding 500 kilometers. And that joint development means very likely an implication of joint deployment, which is why Russia has now threatened a military response for what NATO is doing on its border. And that brings us to the U.S. and Germany have foiled a Russian murder plot against the German CEO of Rheinmetall. That's one of Germany and Europe's largest weapons producers. This follows on the heels again of this elevated threat condition level in Europe among U.S. bases there because of an alleged threat from Russian saboteurs. So, very interesting that you see the narrative now ramping up as well. And it looks like, again, we are headed headlong into World War III. Also, NATO lays out steps for Ukraine's eventual entry into NATO. NATO leaders promised to provide a, quote, well-lit bridge to NATO's entry into the bloc during this week's summit in Washington. We have an incredibly robust package that will be unveiled over the next couple of days at NATO that builds a very clear, strong, robust, well-lit bridge to NATO membership for Ukraine, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said. Also, from Visegrad 24, a map of French churches that have been set on fire, vandalized, or attacked in the last few years. Look at that. Stare at that for a second. This is the targeted attacks I've been talking about that the left is planning for the United States of America. And in some respects, it has already started. Also, I want to just go back to these Russian warships that were patrolling off of Florida that we talked about. And now the Chinese ships off the Alaska coast. According to J. Michael Waller, they were within the U.S. exclusive economic zone. So, that is a provocation similar to what the Chinese are doing in the Philippines. And now it's happened in the U.S. exclusive economic zone. In other words, weakness in the White House has invited this. And now we're going to move to the national front. Representative Thomas Massie put out a very lengthy tweet regarding the death of his wife, Rhonda. I had the opportunity to actually meet Rhonda years back and left 4 wonderful children and Thomas without a mother, without a wife. And he wanted to put to bed some of the conspiracy theories that were out there that, in fact, his house is very secure. His family was with her when she passed. An autopsy has been conducted, but the results have not been released to the Massie family yet. And clearly they did not take COVID shots. So we wanted to get that out, but also to be very just transparent, to mourn the loss of his wife. So if you find it in your time tonight in prayer, pray for the Massie family as well. He is a very ardent and very strong defender of the Constitution of the United States of America. And that brings us to one of the most laughable articles in the brief today, and that is Fox News is reporting that Russia is interfering in the 2024 election to help Trump, according to U.S. intelligence officials. Are you kidding me? They're going to try that again? Oh my goodness. There you have it. Which brings us to something even more serious, and that is from Laura Loomer. Democrat officials are now leaking about the Biden White House ahead of a 6:30 p.m. press conference today. Democrats are now blaming Biden's closest advisors for shielding the public from the full extent of Biden's mental decline. But I want you to hear the key point of this tweet. Joe Biden hasn't had a full cabinet meeting in 9 months. Who's running the country? Well, clearly it's not him. Clearly, somebody has been hiding this information from the American people. And if you're hiding that information from the American people, you're also hiding it from our allies. Who has the nuclear launch codes? Who's responsible for that if somebody attacks the United States of America? I mean, these are legitimate questions that need to be asked right now. And clearly there's no answer. But if someone else is running the country besides the duly elected president, that is treason. That's a coup, by definition. That's why they're afraid Trump's going to win, because it's now so obvious. In fact, for a lot of us, we knew Biden's mental decline, but what was so shocking is that so many people were shocked about it. And if you were one of those people shocked about Joe Biden's mental decline, you need to ask yourself where you've consumed your media for the last year. And I thank you for now listening to Patriot Radio, where you can actually get this information months and years ahead of time. And coming to us from Gateway Pundit, Democrats blocked the SAVE Act in the Senate, leaving the door open for illegal immigrants to vote in the presidential election. Again, supposed to uphold the Constitution of the United States. That appears to be treason as well. And also the House defeated a resolution holding Merrick Garland in contempt. Here are the 4 GOP people that voted no: John Duarte, Tom McClintock, David Joyce, and Michael Turner. And I tell you what, can we bring that picture up from Gateway Pundit? So these House members should have known that the Attorney General has been engaged in conduct that has been contrary to the United States Constitution. And so these faces should be etched in everyone's memory. And that brings us now to America's Future. America's Future Stop the Shame campaign is mobilizing citizens against HHS's horrifying treatment of migrant children. This is a call to every patriot who believes in justice and humanity to join us in preventing this inhumane treatment and ensuring these children receive dignity and the care that they deserve. Well, what's this coming from? Well, yesterday and the day before, news was breaking, and it includes this. Senator Chuck Grassley releases shocking records confirming that HHS has placed children to sponsors linked to the MS-13 gang. And in fact, there have been children delivered to the same addresses, and yet when they go there, there's no children present, or only a couple. Clearly not as many as they've dropped off there, which begs the question, where have those children gone? There's going to be more coming out about this. This is being exposed as we speak. There's going to be more coming out about this in the next couple of weeks. So just keep paying attention to this. The United States government placing children to sponsors linked to MS-13 gang. Wow. Pretty well a bombshell right there. Also, J. Michael Waller, the FBI's Stephen M. D'Antuono, who rigged the fake kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer, is the same one who led the raid on Mar-a-Lago out of the Washington field office. Now, so you see these same people are in charge of some of these big news stories. But Gretchen Whitmer just signed a bill into law which prohibits recounting votes based on allegations of election fraud. Why would you do that? Why would you close the door to transparency unless there was fraud you were trying to cover up for? That's a great question. I wonder what her answer would be to that question. Also, will the Huffington Post, the SPLC, and the ADL now make note of Sami al-Arian's interview and apologize to those who they smeared as Islamophobes for calling attention to the Muslim Brotherhood threat? Fantastic question, because his interview very clearly points to what we've been saying all along, and that the Muslim Brotherhood's stated goal here in the United States of America, the Muslim Brotherhood's stated goal is civilization jihad here in America and to overthrow the United States. Also, coming to us from Epoch Times, Army investigating message sent out claiming "Make America Great Again" is a sign of white supremacy. I wonder what's going to happen with this investigation. Also, celebrating Columbus Day might be a sign. The message sent by Cheney Pickard with the U.S. Army Aviation and Missile Center via an official government email address includes a diagram showing a pyramid. Near the top of the pyramid are phrases and actions deemed overt white supremacy. And there's some things listed in here that would be. And then it says, "Make America Great Again," as a campaign slogan of Donald Trump. Celebrating Columbus Day could also be signs. We're going to go ahead and post this. And let's make sure we link this and post it underneath the Rumble video for today's episode. Also, the real danger here is that DOD has a massive and very dangerous counterintelligence and counterterrorism capability. If they're labeling Americans as terrorists in PowerPoint, they're likely already using that capability against them here at home. Where does this come from? Well, a briefing at Fort Liberty, aka Fort Bragg, listed several pro-life organizations, including the National Right to Life, as terrorist groups or terrorist organizations. Wow. Calling evil good and good evil. And lastly, on the brief, top figures in the Progressive Democrats' Transition Integrity Project. We're going to talk about this more with J. Michael Waller today. To oust Trump in 2020 have now directed their efforts to oust Biden. Now, they know Trump is going to win. They actually have planned for it since February, and they are planning the aftermath of it, which is riots and lawfare. And I'm saying they're planning, they're doing war games. They're planning for it in these war games. How would they react in the event of these things? The Transition Integrity Project, though, listed literally headlines and called out January 6th as a date. We detailed it on this show in August 2020. How would they know it ahead of time unless they had some kind of influence in the outcome of 2020. But now they're turning their sights on Biden. So clearly they're giving up on the election right now, or at least trying a last desperate attempt to stop Trump. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. This Saturday at City Hall, 3 o'clock, we're going to be doing the United March for Israel. And many churches in the area are participating. Look forward to seeing you all there. I hope you have a fantastic weekend regardless. But it's time that we need to stand up. I need to speak out. This summer is going to be one of the most critical summers in American history. And you're going to ask yourself years from now, what did I do in that summer? And I pray and I hope that you answer that question correctly, along with all of us here at Patriot Radio. And that brings us now to our guest today, is J. Michael Waller. He's one of the most accomplished strategic and intelligence professionals on the planet. He currently serves as the senior analyst for strategy, Center for Security Policy. J. Michael Waller on X. Thank you for joining me today on Patriot Radio. It's great to have you back on.
Great to be back with you.
So let's talk a little bit about France. Now, I don't know how they exactly are set up, but it seemed pretty crazy that they could pull candidates from a race to affect the outcome so that the will of the majority was subverted and the radical left took power in France. And when I say radical left, an actual leader of Antifa became a member of parliament there. So if you can expand on that, what happened?
Right. What happened in France is really something that we need to watch, because France is on its fifth republic, meaning that since it overthrew the monarchy right after the American Revolution, it's overthrown its government a number of times. And in those times, it's had 5 different republics with different constitutions. So in this sense, you had the popular vote for the conservatives. They were against globalism. They were against all this weird stuff happening to their country and the illegal immigration coming in and destroying their culture. And the French people voted overwhelmingly for a conservative candidate. And what happened was the elites went and then they redid everything according to their own rules. And they put together a socialist, communist, Antifa coalition to nullify those election results and to create a new government.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because the French are facing a jihadist invasion, and there's been no question about that. But also you had the left joining it, and communists, so Antifa, joining this. You have the red-green axis literally being played out. If you can explain a little bit about what that actually is, because a lot of people were shocked that people on the left would align with people whose values don't seem to match up.
Right. The red-green axis, we've talked about a lot at the Center for Security Policy. We've written a lot about it over the years. It's a coalition between jihadists and Muslim extremists who want to basically overthrow our Constitution and impose religious Sharia law on our country. Have us live the way they do in Afghanistan or Iran or any of these other places miserable places where the women are covered and all the rest of it. So they want to overthrow our government. So does the far left. They want to overthrow our government, but they want to overthrow it in different ways. So the red are the Marxists and the green are the Islamists, the jihadists, and they're in a tactical alliance now to attack the foundations of our constitutional monarchy. I'm thinking of France or
Right.
Europe, some European model, but our constitutional government here, as they're doing in France. And they'll kill each other off someday, but right now they're in a tactical alliance to overthrow the existing republic.
Right, and they're putting forth a united front, at least temporarily, to make sure that Marine Le Pen and her allies do not get into power. And I guess what was even more troubling is on the heels of this. So she wins the first election. Then there's the runoff election. They pull a bunch of candidates out so they can consolidate. And then immediately following the results of this runoff election, they try to charge her with various criminal charges to throw her in prison. And obviously we've seen that happen here in the United States.
Right. Yeah. So you see the pattern. And just like the Marxist government has done in Brazil. against former President Bolsonaro. You're seeing a pattern here, and you're seeing the Biden administration supports all of this.
Right. And I think that that's what's emboldened these countries in Europe to do this, is they know that the United States is either supportive or is just going to be completely apathetic, or who actually ever is running the White House is going to be completely apathetic or emboldened.
Yeah, it looks like we're taking a hands-off approach, but we're applauding from the sidelines. But what we're seeing in France, a modern democracy, right? A modern, sophisticated country that has been destroying itself for a couple of generations already through this mass immigration of Islamic lunatics who are not going to assimilate and become real Frenchmen. They want to take it over and impose an Islamic government in France. It comes to fruition now in France.
It does. And I think this is really important for everybody listening and watching to understand that this is not like us having just a personal opinion about this and being just upset that we don't like Islam. They have stated this as their goal, and the Muslim Brotherhood in particular and all their offshoots and their affiliates have stated this as a goal, civilization jihad. And if you go into that a little bit.
Yeah. Western civilization. And this is why the red-green axis is so convenient to those within it, because they both want to destroy Western civilization. The cultural Marxists for one reason, and the civilizational jihadists for a different reason. So it's a tactical thing. Someday they'll wipe each other out, or they'll try to, and you'll have the country plunged into a two-way or a three-way civil war, as France has had in the not-so-distant past.
Do you think this might lead to a civil war in France? I mean, this also, something very similar happened in Poland as well, where you had a conservative majority thrown out, and really some electoral, I'll just call them shenanigans at this point, happen. And now that has turned to a leftist government in charge in Poland, partially because their president is not.
Yeah, it's not inconceivable that France could fall apart. It has fallen apart, several times, even in our parents' lifetimes, at least, if not our own, it's fallen apart before. So it was on its, fourth and fifth republics, and you had, let's be frank about it, you had a third of the French population supported Hitler.
Right.
And about a third supported Stalin, and only about a third supported civilization. So this is nothing new for France to be going through.
And this seems to become a pattern now. We have this something similar also in Spain. Javier Milei is trying his best to get in front of this in Argentina. But if you could go into a few more countries in Europe, and then we'll get into the United States.
Well, you've got Germany is being plunged into big divisions. It's always had a lot of divisions that it's kind of managed, but you have this uniparty of socialist and sort of center left and even some center right entities that want to keep a socialist pan-European status quo. This is Germany's the European Union is Germany's way of controlling Europe, the way Germany has always wanted to do, and it's always done it with the uniparty in France. Those are the two main powers of the European Union bloc to control all of Europe and ultimately displace NATO, which is in the American interest here. You have these radical movements now spreading to countries that want to defend themselves from this, like Poland. They weren't allowing in these huge numbers of illegal aliens and people who didn't want to assimilate. So if you immigrated to Poland, you had to be Polish. You had to speak Polish. You had to learn Polish at least and become a Polish citizen. So what you had there is the left in Poland was voted out or somehow removed the very Polish-centric, patriotic, Poland first, very pro-American Polish government. And now what are they doing? They're tearing down all of the safeguards that Poland had to keep the integrity of its society intact. Like you're seeing, like in Hungary, it's the last standing independent country of Europe where they're really standing up to the globalism and the Sorosism and the socialism and everything else, and they're trying to keep their Hungarian identity, but they've lost their European allies to do this. And so they have been facing away from Europe toward places like Russia, which is scary to think that a pro-Western country like Hungary, in order to keep its Christian culture, has to go to a KGB-run country like Russia, and yet stay in the NATO alliance and stay a military ally of ours. So we're in a very, very scary time.
Yes, and I think people need to understand the complexity of that Viktor Orban is really put in the middle of all of these competing entities. And now there's these political parties like Geert Wilders, and you have Marine Le Pen and more are now joining his bloc as part of the European Union, because Victor came out and said, hey, we need to have a bloc of all of these political parties, not just him, which is a very wise move because he was becoming isolated.
Yeah, in fact, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands is another example. Netherlands is a small country, but it's economically very, very powerful, and it's a key to Europe. And when you have, the Dutch are so mild mannered, they don't bother anybody. But when they have finally had enough, and the real revolution against that, it was mainly twofold. It was this uncontrolled migration from North Africa and the Middle East and elsewhere on the one part, and it was also the destruction of the Dutch way of life, which has a significant, like in Poland and like in France, a significant rural culture, which the European Union wanted to destroy. So you had this, the Dutch government was forcing farmers out of business simply because they were farming in ways that the globalists didn't want them to farm, pushing them out of business. So you had in France, I think Spain, and in a few other countries, you had farmers go to protest, as they did in parts of Canada even. It's happening in Canada too, on our own continent. Where the farmers would actually come and spray manure all over public buildings to protest their disgust at what was happening. So it's a very, citizen-based revolt that's happening against these elites.
It is, and I think that's what's happening with the awakening, I'll call it that, here in the United States of America. And I want to shift to the United States, but I have to preface what we're going to talk about with the Transition Integrity Project report. Now, here on Patriot Radio, we highlighted this in August of 2020. I think General Paul Valley, Jack Decker was on, and we went through this report because we didn't know what was going to happen exactly in November. Now we do, and I want to go through, and Travis, you can pull this up. This was a gaming of the election and what the possibilities were that were going to happen. Now, I'm going to take the Biden win scenario, and I want to just read a couple of things here. The Biden campaign framed Trump's actions as ugly and divisive, engaging independents and moderate Republicans to speak out against this threat. And this is in August before the election. And then they specifically call out Mitt Romney would try to convince Republican senators to support the Biden victory. After failing, which this happened, Romney and McConnell in this next line would privately signal to other Republicans that they support Romney's cross-aisle effort, recognizing the moderate Republicans are more likely to prevail in 2022. Now, I'm just going to stop there. There's more we're going to get into here in a second. How is it possible they would know in granular detail who would take which side? This is a leftist project. Who would take which side? And then spell out exactly how Biden would react in the media as a talking point in August of 2020.
Yeah, this is what you call a vanguard movement in revolutionary terms, meaning you've got a vanguard party, which is a political party where you can have certain types of debate and discussion, but once a decision is made, every member of the party gets behind that decision and those people. It's really a revolutionary party. The Bolsheviks were a vanguard party, for example. The Democrat Party and the progressive Democrats have turned the party into a vanguard party. The Republican Party is widespread, wide open. You can have a Mitt Romney and a Donald Trump and traditional conservatives in the party, and it's a Big Tent party. But it's not a vanguard party, meaning it's not always united. So people like Romney, people like McConnell have built their careers cutting side deals with the Democrats and the vanguard party. Now, in politics, it's necessary to cut deals to accomplish policies. But when you're running elections, that's a different matter. You have to stay united to win elections. But in this case, you have the Romney camp not only sharing details with the Democrats in the election, but helping the Democrats win the elections simply because the Romney camp and the McConnell camp didn't like Donald Trump. Now, so this is where the Democrats peel away Republicans and destroy the unity behind a candidate and continue to win elections by through disloyalty on the other side.
And so this is the key point, disloyalty from the other side. So as Rich Higgins wrote in his memorandum to the President of the United States, memorandum to President Trump in 2017, he said that the Democrats were this vanguard party, but the Republicans, quote, were the designated defeat mechanism to usher in the new regime, end quote. And we literally see in this TIPS report, as it became evident that the Biden victory would be certified, and then it goes into the Republicans would have to help make everyone fall in line. So the implication of this is a plan. This is an intentional strategy and a plan. This didn't just happen. I want to get into the next couple here in a second. Help people understand the intentionality behind this, because I think this is where many Americans are missing it. They're like, this just happened. People were stupid. People did this. This just happened. But that's not really the case.
Yeah. Well, it's timely to talk about this because I just came over from the U.S. Senate. I'm right on Capitol Hill right now, so you can see this happening, live, and you know some of the people involved because you've either interacted with them or purposely avoided them. So in this case, you have entrenched interests, special interests, people whose business model has been big government, a career in government, a career in living off the taxpayer, whether it's as an elected official or whether it's a staffer who goes up through the political system and then goes to become a lobbyist or a consultant or a corporate executive or board member, makes the big money, and then goes in and around through that revolving door of politics. So this is what you're seeing right now. I mean, think of it. Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts, of all places. Right. He didn't get elected governor of Massachusetts as a Republican who did not collude with the Democrats. He absolutely did. He finally went to Utah using the Romney name and the Mormon, costume that he had to make himself look like a real Utahn when he's not. So he is typical of this uniparty of Washington, where Donald Trump, the outsider, the guy with nothing to lose by draining the swamp, comes in. They have to stop him at all costs because he's going to destroy their business model of leeching off the rest of the country.
So, which brings us to the next point. And again, this is probably the most startling part, at least for me, of this entire TIPS report. A critical moment in the gameplay was when the Joint Chiefs of Staff leaked the internal discussions. In other words, they subverted their commander-in-chief. Had taken place about how to handle the escalating situation, including the consideration of resigning in protest of Trump's continued efforts to, quote, sow unrest. Notice this, again, August 2020, before the election. The leak indicated that the Joint Chiefs' commitment was to the Constitution rather than to the president or to a political party or to a particular party. And once the Senate voted in agreement with the House on January 6th, the military made it clear that it was ready to support Biden as the president on January 20th. Literally, January 6th is called out. And in December, the headline was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it almost reads verbatim in the article. Again, the military is supposed to uphold an oath to the Constitution, but subverting the commander-in-chief, denying a request of the commander-in-chief, clearly seems to go against the Constitution. Can you help us understand this?
Yeah, what you're describing is a crime It's what's called the high crime in the Constitution. And this is where the uniformed active duty military senior officers break their oath to support the Constitution and become political actors. Now, this is what you have in third world banana republics, where the military takes part and actively takes part in preventing an election from taking place, or changing the results, or preventing an elected president from taking office. It happens all the time throughout history in places like Latin America and other third world, African countries and so forth. But it's happened now with that transition integrity project that you just described from 4 years ago. It happened. This was a crime. Now, if it was active duty generals, that is a serious threat to our Constitution right there. But you also have this year, 2024, retired generals who are not private citizens anymore, because once you're a military officer, you're for your life, you are subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and there are certain things you simply cannot do. And plotting to overthrow your government or plotting to deny election results is one of them.
Right. And so they try to claim, of course, that they're on the right side. It was Trump that was trying to do this unrest and all of this. But the fact of the matter is, what we see now is this pattern emerging where Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Marine Le Pen in France, Donald Trump here in America are all being accused of this unrest. Now, they've largely failed here in the United States. So what does this mean now, J. Michael Waller, for the next 5 years?
It's uncharted territory. Our country has never been in this position. Now, you talked a few minutes ago about the Transition Integrity Project, about resigning in protest. Recall that as the Civil War was about to start here, Abraham Lincoln asked Robert E. Lee to be chief of the army. And Lee had the decency to resign, saying, "Sir, I cannot fight against my home state of Virginia. I cannot serve you." He didn't subvert the Lincoln administration. Can you imagine if Confederate leaders ended up running the Union Army during the Civil War at the very beginning, and what would have happened to us as a nation, right? So so this is the equivalent of Confederate supporters staying in office to subvert from the inside to abuse their military power.
Do you think there are going to be shenanigans coming up in the next couple of months that will affect directly the election?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They have been holding the same, a lot of the members of the 2020 Transition Integrity Project have been involved this year, as early as January and February of this year, running more exercises with retired general officers to figure out ways to prevent Trump from being inaugurated, even if he's elected. They were presuming in these exercises in February that Trump would win a free and fair election. So their job, and the they is crazy. It's senior Pentagon lawyers, senior Justice Department lawyers, formerly in government. One of the senior lawyers, her husband was a senior lawyer staffing the United States Supreme Court. So they're really well plugged in. They're based out of Georgetown Law School, which is the #1 law school in Washington, D.C. And it's a feeder school to the Justice Department, to the FBI, to all the other government agencies. And so they're really well networked. These people vacation together, they socialize together, they promote each other in government and out, and they're the ones who are behind this. So they've been running this new operation this year. The Atlantic, no conservative journal, The Atlantic, was invited to send a reporter to watch these war games, and the reporter came back horrified at what he saw. He wrote about it. That's how we know.
So let's talk about that. What did that reporter see?
So that reporter, his name escapes me right now, but you can find it in the Atlantic. I think I tweeted about it on X. He came back and said, "This is alarming to see that these officials are plotting to overthrow the constitutional order of things." Hate Trump or like him, it doesn't matter. It's alarming to the country that these people are doing this. And it's not just kids. It's not just whack jobs. It is people who serve senior positions in the Pentagon. They know how to mobilize. Senior Justice Department people. They know how to get wage lawfare against the citizen. And in fact, the same group said that they had prepared by February. So that was months ago, more than 100 pieces of litigation to drop to hogtie anyone in the Trump administration who's doing things they don't like. Not only prevent them from working in an efficient capacity, but to tie up their personal lives and ruin them as people.
This is incredible. We're actually having this conversation. It really is, because like you, I served in a capacity in the military, and just to see this happening in our country, it grieves my spirit. I want to shift to the last part of this, and that is, what can people do? Because the average American is just going to be saying, this seems to be way out of my hands. I'm going to vote.
Yeah.
But this seems way out of my hands. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, this is in the Lord's hands, really. But there's really no, because see, they're presuming that the elections will be free and fair, that Trump will win a free and fair election. So they can't have that. This is why the Democrats this week, right now, in Congress, are voting against an initiative that would make it illegal for non-citizens to vote. Now, it already is illegal, but this is a federal law there was the Chip Roy bill in the House. It was supported strongly by Speaker Johnson. It's going to go on its way to the Senate. So the Democrats, almost to a person, are against any law that would prevent illegal aliens from voting.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of puts into perspective, doesn't it, all of these camps that the Department of Homeland Security has built in Panama and other countries, these processing centers to flood our country with illegal aliens to provide the bodies to vote. Now, they don't need themselves to come out and vote. They just need to be there as persons so that the number of ballots matches the people.
I want you to say that again. We are. Okay. I want you to say that part again, because this is the key part of this entire discussion today.
The illegal aliens that the Biden administration is purposely bringing across our border, even paying for flights from Africa for them to come here, to flood our country, being pushed into states and congressional districts around the country, they are there to provide the numbers so that the Biden ballots match the number of people. Because where you have more ballots than you have registered voters, there's obvious fraud. But if you can register these illegal aliens to vote, and in 49 of 50 states, the state welfare offices give illegal aliens voter registration forms for them to register to vote. If the number of voter registration forms are filled out that match the numbers of people, then anyone with pre-filled in ballots or any other type of voter fraud can say, look, there was no fraud because we don't have more ballots than we have voters. We have the same number of ballots and voters. That's one reason these illegal aliens are being brought in such huge numbers.
Incredible. J. Michael Waller, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate your fighting for all Americans up there on Capitol Hill today, and really appreciate all of the information you're putting out. Blessings to you.
Good to be with you, Matt.
J. Michael Waller, pray, fast, and stand. Right now, some of this is in clearly God's hands. We still need to show up, though, and vote. Make sure you're registered to vote, because you just heard the plan to overthrow the constitutional order in the United States going back to February, because they knew Trump would win a free and fair election, and they could not allow that to happen. I want you to understand the import of what I just said. This clip needs to be shared nationally. We are in a fight for the future of America as a republic. We are not a democracy. Article 4 requires, demands in the Constitution of the United States of America that we have a Republican form of government. And the difference between a Republican form of government and a Democrat form of government is that a Republican form of government, it doesn't matter who's in the majority, they can never vote away the rights of the minority, because those rights were given to us by God. In a democracy, the Founding Fathers even talked about this, there would be a voting away with 50+1 of the rights of the minority. And so they threw out, they didn't even have for discussion a democracy. James Madison specifically, and others. So what we're seeing right now is an intentional, planned takeover and disruption of the constitutional order by people who have sworn an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and who are actively subverting it. That is where we're at in the United States right now. Pray, fast, stand, make sure you're getting registered to vote and you vote. Also, speak with your local elected officials. See where they stand on these things. If they've even heard about the Transition Integrity Project. And this article from The Atlantic detailing these same games that they're doing behind the scenes right now and decided on plans back in February. Bookmark this episode. Make sure you share it far and wide.